Hello summoners and welcome to another Pro Guides video. I'm Zyrene and today we're going to be talking about how Riot has ruined the jungle. If you've seen our recent video covering the upcoming preseason changes, you know that a lot of jungle mains, especially those in high elo, aren't too happy about the Season 11 jungle changes. But if you've been playing League for long enough, you know this isn't the first time that jungle has been ruined. In fact, Riot has a track record of what many players consider bad decisions when it comes to balancing jungle. So let's go back and look at some of the biggest errors in Riot's attempts. But first, before we get into all of that, today's question of the day is, in which season do you think jungle was the most fun? And which champion did you enjoy the most then? There definitely isn't a definitive right or wrong answer here, since some seasons have had wildly different metas. Sometimes jungle was such a supportive role that you'd go full tank on champions like Elise and Fiddlesticks and be a full-on CC and utility bot, while in others we had one-shotting Warwicks. For me personally, I think Season 3 and Season 5. Season 5 is when they first introduced the smites, and Season 3 is when I felt jungle had the most agency in terms of vision. As for champions that I really loved playing there, it was Jarvan in Season 3, and in Season 5 it was Rek'Sai. Be sure to let us know your answers in the comments below. And one last thing, be sure to visit us at ProGuides.com. We have the best roster of coaches, top-tier live classes from instructors like Mike Young and Saskio, and courses covering a variety of roles and champions from your favorite pro players like Doublelift. I also highly recommend that you try out our VOD review feature. The way it works is you send in a replay file, and the coach sends you back a fully reviewed VOD. It's a super convenient option that saves you some time, so give it a try. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so if you're a fan of high elo content creators, I'm sure you've heard one of these before. Jungle is ruined, mid gap is jungle gap, jungle sure is an overpowered role XD. The thing is, every role has its frustrations. ADCs rely on supports setting them up, supports rely on their ADCs following up on said support, mid is the most affected by support roams, and top lane is a lone island that can't impact the map. But junglers seem to complain the most about their role, and there's a good amount of reason for it. Like I said earlier, Riot has made some horrible decisions in the jungle, and a lot of it has been targeted at making jungle more team reliant, which can feel like a huge loss in skill expression to better players. Some players have worked years to become at the top of the ladder maining the role, and Riot has, on more than one occasion, basically added training wheels to give worse players a chance to shorten the gap. So with that general concept in mind, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the worst decisions Riot has implemented in the jungle. You could argue some changes are worse than others, so we won't be doing things in any particular order. However, the one change that most junglers likely will agree on as being one of the very worst has to do with the Scuttle Crab. Jungle has always been about making choices in your pathing. Do you go for a quick level 3 into a gank, or a full clear? Some mix of the two? How about counter jungling? Well, when Riot added the Rift Scuttler to the mix, things changed a bit, but it wasn't necessarily the choice to put little Taunty in the game. In fact, on release, she was fine. An optional camp that didn't give much experience, but did reward you with some gold and some vision. But the real problem arose on patch 8.10. On this patch, Scuttle's spawn timer was lowered to 2 minutes exactly, had better scaling gold, and offered a ton of experience, even on its first spawn. In fact, it offered so much experience that all of that aforementioned pathing went out the window. Every single game was take double buffs and run to fight a Scuttle Crab. This caused a massive shift in the meta. Suddenly, you had to take a super strong early mid and jungle duo that could fight for Scuttle Crabs right away. Not doing so meant the enemy instantly had a huge experience lead over you, could invade you, bully you, and just have a huge advantage, just because they can kill a camp that doesn't even fight back. And since it very often came down to forcing a fight 2v2 with the other jungle and mid, or even 3v3 or 4v4 if side lanes got involved, many games resulted in a one fight leading to the victorious side not only getting kills in the Scuttle Crab on one side of the river, but the other side as well. And when you're both picking early game champions that want to skirmish, the snowball effect from that single fight could pretty much decide the game. So to recap, the 8.10 Scuttle Crab changes were awful for these reasons. 1. You were forced to give up creative and intuitive pathing, to play like an ape and fight for Scuttle if you wanted a lead. 2. If you did choose to fight, you were 100% reliant on having the better mid laner, since one mid rotating before the other made skill in the jungle almost irrelevant. 3. If you didn't fight for one scuttle, you agreed to a gentleman's handshake to trade scuttles, which still gave up creative pathing for the sake of conforming to one meta. And lastly, if you opted out of going for Scuttle Crab at all, you just fell massively behind no matter what. Basically, you were forced to go with one of the first two options. So with that, I think you can see why most junglers hated this patch. Riot did make some amends when they pushed Scuttle back to a later spawn of 3 minutes and 15 seconds, although it took just shy of a year to see that. Even now, being double scuttled by the enemy jungle can be a really tilting experience in the early game, but the later spawn does let you get in a bit more of a clear beforehand, at least opening up chances for champions that need it to get level 3. And for weaker junglers, you even have time to establish some vision to maybe see which scuttle the enemy is headed for so you can mirror them. For this next reason, we'll have to go way back in time, to Season 4. Before this point in time, junglers used to track all timers manually, and those that did it had a leg up on the enemies that didn't. This was especially huge when you were counter jungling your enemy's buffs away, since you would know exactly when you needed to revisit the camp if you wanted to steal it multiple times in a row. Then, in Season 4, seemingly as a response to third-party programs already providing jungle timers, Riot came out with some of their own. On release, these timers showed when Baron, Dragon, and buffs were spawning as long as you saw their death. But this was taken even further, when it was decided that we deserved exact info on Baron and Dragon respawn timers, whether or not we could see the kill itself. Some players called this a quality of life buff, saying things like, anyone can track buffs, this just makes it so we can put more effort into other things like team fighting and other macro decisions. But the thing is, being able to mentally juggle those things while tracking timers was considered a skill, and those saying that were usually the casual players themselves. The majority of higher level junglers agreed that this was a subtle way to lower the skill ceiling. Now let's talk about some jungle items. Generally speaking, itemization for junglers has been pretty good, but there have been a few times where Riot has blundered in this department. For items, the first thing we'll talk about is the removal of Green Smite. Green Smite, or Tracker's Knife as the item was officially named, was an alternative to the Skirmisher Saber and Stalker's Blade, as well as the poaching one, but nobody ever took that one. And it was aimed at giving junglers a way to establish vision control and play a more supportive role rather than skirmishing and ganking power, which the other two gave. The removal of this option forced junglers into one of the more skirmishy options, taking away a strategic element to the jungle role. Some would consider this a good thing, as too much vision meant less fighting overall, but honestly, at higher levels, it was like a game of chess between wards and sweepers, and clever warding locations were, in their own way, another expression of skill. Vision control is knowledge, and knowing is half the battle. This is something that we saw Green Smite in every professional game because the junglers were contributing to the vision game. And this is actually a change that affected me personally, where I peaked in my D1 promos to Masters multiple times as well as Masters itself, and once this was removed, I plummeted pretty hard. I was really reliant on just using vision, and I had trained myself to really be about helping the team in that sense. And having to shift my style completely to something I was definitely not as good at affected my gameplay and also my enjoyment of the game. The next item we'll be looking at is Feral Flare. This item went through many iterations and eventually resulted in the current jungle item Bloodrazor, but in its early days, it was a complete nightmare. On champs that synergized with on-hit builds, the infinite stacking damage from killing camps and champions was strong. This was a problem for the same reason that many players complain about farming junglers today. You could literally have no impact on the game in the early stages, but if you AFK farmed your jungle, you would randomly hit a massive power spike just for playing PvE that allowed you to hard carry games. Having high risk, high reward hyperscaling champions with weak early games is fine, but when you're putting those champions in the jungle where they can farm uncontested, it eliminates the possibility of camping their lane to shut them down. And when those champions spike so hard that they can come back from huge deficits as long as they kill a set amount of camps, it takes a lot of skill out of the game. Feral Flare was such a broken item that if you built it along with the Wit's End on Warwick, your ultimate would literally one-shot people. For those of you who don't know about pre-rework Warwick, his old ultimate suppressed like it does now, but it was a point-and-click blink that let you simply suppress an enemy, no skill shot necessary. So being able to one-shot opponents with zero chance at counterplay at just 2 items? Yeah, there's a reason Riot tried again and again and again to rework this item, until they arrived at the relatively healthy Bloodrazor that we have today. And the last item we'll be looking at is one that's still a problem today. Red Smite is an item meant to increase dueling power, but in doing so, it adds yet another piece to the collection of things that take skill out of the jungle. Red Smite is so strong that it can, by itself, decide a fight, especially in the early game, when there aren't many other items backing you up. It's basically a budget combination of Exhaust and Ignite together, and when you're fighting against a jungler that has it versus your own blue Smite, you know you're already fighting from a massive disadvantage. Smite choices should add utility, not just outright decide if you have the upper hand in a fight. This last change we'll be talking about is aimed at making the jungle new player friendly. But honestly, for lack of a better phrase, it's just giving training wheels to bad players and cutting out the necessary process of learning to get good at core mechanics as a jungler. Earlier in Season 10, Riot added increased sustain to your jungle items when your HP goes below a certain threshold. This basically makes it so that kiting is less important and gives you a way to almost mindlessly clear camps, getting low but not dying, even when you ignore the basics. But that wasn't enough. No sir, not for Season 11. Riot has decided to slap Omnivamp onto the jungle starter item and increase all camps' movement speed. So to summarize, in Season 10, Riot has handed out band-aids for players that don't have the proper skills to kite. But in Season 11, Riot is instead nerfing the mechanic altogether and compensating with higher overall healing. I really don't like the direction this is headed. Skills like proper kiting are important ways to express player skill and are even crucial to certain champions like Evelynn and Zac. The HP difference between someone who knows how to kite and someone who doesn't at the end of a clear can decide if they can go on to gank or if they are forced to base and heal. And that is all we have to talk about for now about how Riot has ruined the jungle. I'd like to know what your take is on all of this. Be sure to let us know that, as well as your answer to the question of the day in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I can't wait to see you guys back at the next one. But until then, good luck out there on the Rift, stay safe, and wash those hands.